we are going to turn to some AOB now and do the next in our series of favourite films from particular directors. And today what we've picked is the great Quentin Tarantino. And as always, there's been a bit of a tussle amongst us, I think, for who's going to get what. Andy, let's start with your choice for Quentin Tarantino film.
Yeah, well, I went for the obvious. I went for Pulp Fiction.
This is a moral test of oneself.
I do believe Marcellus, my husband, your boss, told you to take me out and do whatever I wanted.
Whether or not you can maintain loyalty.
The three things I love about this film. Firstly, the soundtrack. The soundtrack CD is one of my most played CDs. Absolutely love this. Every song on there is a hit. Secondly, I love the structure of the film. You have no idea when you're watching that opening scene that two characters we're about to meet are in that cafe. I'm trying not to give spoilers. I don't imagine there's not many people listening to this who haven't seen Pulp Fiction.
I think you'll be safe.
Yeah, I think we're pretty safe. You have no idea that those two characters are in that cafe right at the beginning. So I love the structure. And then I watched it again this week, and the third thing is with the scenes where Quentin Tarantino himself plays a role, it's almost like he's directing while he's acting. There's a scene where Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta have to strip themselves of bloodied clothing. And Tarantino is stood there with his finger pointed out and talking to them in character, but it's almost like he's directing as well at the same time. I just found that rather amusing to think this guy's acting, but he's telling what these guys want to do at the same time. So I think the soundtrack is terrific. The structure is great. I still don't have a clue what's in that case. And to be honest, I don't really want to know because I just think that would spoil it for everyone. So it's just and obviously being a Rev, the biblical quotations and the way in which Samuel L. Jackson talks about God intervening and saving their lives when they should be stone cold dead. I just found that choice of Ezekiel chapter 25 riveting, and I did go back and look it up again, and it is a great passage. So yeah, that's why I like Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, it's a good choice. It's certainly a film that has some really clever and shocking twists, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those films you can watch again and again because you do want to know what's in the case. At the same time, you don't. And just to watch the structure, the very clever structure of the way the story is told, or the Bruce Willis character, you think, well, what on earth has this got to do with anything, But and how nice to see Bruce on screen again, given what we know has happened to him in recent days and the illness that he's suffering from. So yes. I just think it's great, and as I say, the soundtrack is one of my most played soundtracks.
Good stuff. Okay, so that's a classic for Andy. Emma, what did you go for?
So mine was a toss-up between two that I would say are not high up the list of people's top films. In the end, I plumped for Death Proof.
Do I frighten you? Is it my scar? It's your car.
I would love to say there are sensible reasons why I like this film, but I like to de-stress with violent action movies, and that's what it says on the tin. It's exactly what it does. I think Kurt Russell as stuntman Mike is just hilarious, and you can't go wrong with a bunch of women getting revenge. It's right up my street. I love it for no sensible reason other than that.
Okay, you're welcome. If Scott Forbes could have G.I. Jane last week, then you can have Death Proof. Yeah.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. So Scott can't be with us today. He picked Django Unchained.
What's your name?
Django.
Then you're exactly the one I'm looking for.
Hey, no sale.
Oh, very well.
The fact Scott's not on here tonight allowed me to basically pick up Django Unchained if I'd wanted to as mine. But I've chosen to go for a different film from Quentin Tarantino. I actually picked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Okay.
which might be quite controversial. I can see it is, remember.
What's the matter, partner? It's official, old buddy. Well, has been.
Here I am, flat on my ass. Who I got living next door to me?
I'm Sharon Tate. I'm in the movie.
You're in this?
That's me. I play Miss Carlson, the klutz.
Now, I have to admit, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Tarantino's films. I tend to find them overly violent. And sometimes, I think as a director, he seems to revel in the violence too much for its own sake. And a scene that I remember watching, The Hateful Eight, which I thought was quite a good Western, there's a scene where somebody gets their face blown off. I mean, and really gets their face blown off. But I don't like that level of visceral violence unless it's really a key part of the story. Tarantino, I think he's very clever in what he does, but I can't really name myself as being an absolutely massive Tarantino fan, I have to say. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I thought was a proper old-fashioned film for most of its running length. I thought DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, they just oozed old film star charisma. They were like Cary Grant, James Stewart, etc. And as the respective aging actor losing his confidence and the stuntman who's kind of his emotional prop, I think that was a really lovely dynamic in the film. And I also loved the supporting cast. I thought Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, she's got very, very few lines in the film, but it's a really memorable acting performance that she gives. That scene where she's watching herself in the Matt Helm film, what was it, The Wrecking Crew, where she's on the screen playing the klutz and she's watching herself in the cinema, listening to the audience. I thought it was a beautiful scene.
Yeah, it is.
Al Pacino's great in it. Damian Lewis, I think, gives just a pitch perfect impersonation of Steve McQueen, and there's a minor role playing a hippie who's underage and not even a bit of a slut, a lot of a slut. Margaret Qualley, I thought, was really impressive in that film. So lots of really good performances, and I actually liked the fact that the violence until the final 10 minutes or so was moderately toned down, because I was kind of thinking, seeing Sharon Tate there pregnant, thinking this is going to end horribly given the history that you know about with Sharon Tate. And in the end it went in a strange direction, which I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't seen it, but the violence was more cartoonish than Tarantino has had a tendency to do. And the illustrious Mrs. Movie Man, who went to the cinema to see this with me, I was thinking, ooh, Tarantino film, this is not going to be her cup of tea. But even she found it quite a decent film in that sense. So I like the fact that it was a little bit more Tarantino, slightly more controlled for most of that film. On the downside, I think it's a bit baggy and overlong, and it needs some serious cutting down and pruning, particularly of the driving scenes. There's like minutes of people driving along, not doing anything. I thought, why? What are you doing with this? But for me, as a recreation, I'm a sucker for these recreations of Hollywood type films. And as a recreation of Hollywood in the 60s, it had the cinematography of by Robert Richardson, who's the regular kind of Tarantino cinematography. I thought was just superb. So I know it's not necessarily a perfect choice that a lot of people will go with, but Tarantino, Once Upon a Time, ... in Hollywood. That's my choice for the film. Complete silence, shock and awe.
No, it's a good choice. It's a good choice.
Okay, good.
It's a choice. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
I quite like it as well.
Yeah. Next week, the director we're going to feature is the great Robert Zemeckis. And if you thought Robert Zemeckis only did the one famous film, you'd be wrong, because he's done lots of really great films. And we will be delving into some of those next week.